and thanks for joining us today on the Agile and Nonprofits YouTube channel. We are thrilled to bring another interview to you talking about nonprofits and how they're using Agile, how they're using Scrum, and today, my heart, we have a longtime friend and colleague of mine, Marc Pitman, who is the CEO of the Concord Leadership Group. Hey, Marc, how are you?
I am super anyway, but I'm thrilled to be here too. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, I'd love to let everyone understand a little bit about your work. What is it that Concord Leadership does? What happens under that umbrella?
That's a great question, and it's one that even my parents don't understand. So thank you for asking. Maybe this will help. The Concord Leadership Group, I call it a group of brands. It's the Nonprofit Academy, which is high quality, low cost nonprofit training for leadership and fundraising. That's a membership-based setting. Then there's Fundraising Coach, which most people have known me for all the years that I called my business Fundraising Coach, which is fundraising development and board work on that. And then Concord Leadership Group is the more boutique leadership executive coaching that I'd been doing all the way through. I've always been a leadership guy that just understood fundraising was a leadership issue. So that's why I fronted with Fundraising Coach. But I've often had people hire me for other things, leadership issues, staff issues, labor union relations. And they kept complaining that my Fundraising Coach bio wasn't helpful for them because they'd take it to people, they try to share with people, I want Marc to be my coach. And the people would say, but it's not a philanthropy issue. You're the problem. So the Concord Leadership Group was birthed out of that and formalized a few years ago out of just the reality of helping serve clients better.
Very interesting. And so it gets to the point that what we call ourselves sometimes influences what people think we can do, right?
It's so true. And whether it's our own self-talk about how we talk about ourselves or our corporate speak, one of the challenges too, though, is Fundraising Coach is immediately recognizable. Like I would get on calls and people would say, well, I'm Susie from Louisville, Kentucky. And I'd say, I'm Marc Pitman from fundraisingcoach.com. And people would be like, ooh, fundraisingcoach.com. Now, when I say Concord Leadership Group, they're already moving on to the next person because it's just another
well, everybody knows
name.
The bow tie. That's really what it was. The bow tie is really what people know about, and you too. But so I think what's fascinating about your background and the fact that the leadership is really like the umbrella under which all of your work fits is that you have taken on a new professional development journey recently with us, haven't you, here at Agile and Nonprofits? So you're in the Scrum Master course.
Yes.
About to receive said certificate. I have no doubt you're going to pass your test. But I'd love to hear what interested you about Agile and about Scrum, and why were you willing to dig in on this formal learning?
Well, a few years ago, I had this friend that I was sitting on a dock on a picnic table at a local restaurant in upstate New York. Diane Leonard was talking to me about this just methodology that I had my master's is in organizational leadership. So I had studied Lean and all these other, and Six Sigma, Delta, Black Belts, whatever, all these different types of Agile frameworks. I'd studied this, but it never seemed to be really applicable, even though I was in healthcare. And so we were using Lean and some other things to try to increase productivity, increase safety. But to see you thrive and become so alive and so engaging in sharing how Scrum was transforming your work, that set me on a journey of reading one of the Scrum books. And for years after that, thinking, as my projects dragged out and seemed to take forever and never come to completion, and it was, as a solopreneur, that was, all fingers pointed back at me for the most part, but it was just one of those, man, I bet if I were doing a 2-week sprint, I bet Diane would help me be able to take care of this, because I bet a 2-week sprint would make it so that it'd come to completion, or at least I could feel comfortable about something of value being delivered. I'm even part of there's a entrepreneur who's working on a coaching app for iPhone and hopefully for Android. And I've noticed that every week every week he sends up his team sends an updated, here are the deliverables, here's the new things that we've done, which goes along with a book I read years ago called Minimum Viable Product, which I found incredibly invigorating of what is the minimum that we can do. And it's not because we're slackers, it's because usually, in my experience, when we try to create something out of our head without user information or testing, it's not what they want. And I've seen so many leadership or membership organizations and clubs die on the vine because we develop all these great things in our office, in our own heads. And it's nothing that people find value in. So when the opportunity to do the Scrum Master course came around, I guess this is the third cohort. Is that right?
It's our third cohort of nonprofit professionals. You're right.
It just felt like I got to do this. This is an opportunity I can't pass up. And it's been really interesting too, to take what the Scrum framework and then not plug it into, but well, part of it is to plug it into the work I'm doing, but also to see it already there and just give Scrum names and terminologies and focus to it, which has been very helpful to take some things that seem just disparate and see, oh no, they're all part of a whole.
Well, one of the things, going back to an earlier comment you made about what you call yourself and how people perceive you, and part of, I think, what you've been experiencing in the Scrum Master class a bit is what are the terminology, what are the words that we use in the Scrum framework, and how might we translate that in a way many nonprofits are already very agile minded, so the way they think, and they're just trying to learn the how, the Scrum framework. And so thinking about the way in which you work, or the way in which maybe your clients work, things like sprint or retrospective, which of the language pieces have felt most natural or have given you the most pause as you try to think about translating them?
That's a very interesting question. My speaking career started 25 years ago because I was translating Seth Godin marketing and sales books to nonprofits. So I've lived, my entire professional career has been translating things that people think, well, that can't possibly be for me because that is a for-profit concept, or that is a whatever the other is. And I am unique. I am different. I'm a nonprofit, or I am, I know we're all the same, but we're unique. And we all feel that way. So so much of my life has been translating that I think for me, it's just learning a new vocabulary. It has been challenging. I really feel like I need a phrase book. So when we're doing our courses, I have a second monitor right above my camera. So we'll be on camera, we'll be doing the course, and up there I have the 3-5-3s framework from Scrum. So I can see, okay, they're talking about product owners, or they're talking about Scrum Masters, or is team. Is that the third part? Okay. And so I could just try to figure out, those were the easier ones for me. The 3-5 events are a little bit murkier still. And then the deliverables, or the artifacts, but it's just interesting to have that up there so I can keep learning it. I think where I have seen us get tripped up as a class is things like the programming code language, like bugs. What are the bugs? It's interesting how there's a part of me that resists the new. It's just sort of like, well, it's not a defect. I just didn't do that correctly. But it's interesting to feel that internal resistance to the new. But I hope that answers it. It feels like a different set of language. I guess this is the biggest part, and not the resistance necessarily, but I keep learning this, but I know I'm never probably going to share most of it with a client. It will not help me serve others in my natural work as an executive coach and board trainer and all the other stuff that I do to introduce this language on top of what they're doing. I try to speak the language of the organization. But what it is helping me do is it's like another map, another template to look at and see, okay, how can, they've said this, that fits into this part of Scrum, where can we put those together, or an agile tool, because Scrum is a framework, with an agile framework.
And I seem to recall that there was a recent example I saw you talk about where you got to hear what the client said and think about the Scrum framework and connected dots in a way that you said, where you got to assist. Do you want to share just an anonymous version of that story?
Okay, thank you for making sure it was anonymous. But yeah, so it turns out that this person I thought probably understood Scrum, the Scrum framework. And there was another process in the organization that he just hadn't considered applying it to. So he's a CEO, founder, startup organization, and he hadn't thought of Scrum was used in a lot of the product development, but not in other areas. And he was feeling kind of adrift, and understandably so, in this other area, and wanting to know how to lead. And I said, well, I'm learning this framework, but wouldn't you already meet on a regular basis? Wouldn't that be like a Scrum sprint? And couldn't there be some sort of something completed in that Scrum sprint? And it unlocked everything for him. He's, oh, that's right. Because then I'm a stakeholder, but I'd be also the product owner, and I'm not acting like the product owner at all. And the user stories suck right now. I don't have any of these user stories. So he started using the language he was very comfortable with in the other area of his work, which is exactly what he wanted to be doing as opposed to this area. And so working with this team, the very cool thing too is the team that he felt was adrift all knew the Scrum framework too. So they're going to be able to use it really. It'll be something that just a common language that they'll all be able to swim with, which is great.
That's amazing. It makes my heart smile to hear stories like that. And I think when we look at what nonprofits are doing, nonprofits have toolboxes, right? They have lots of different ways that different teams operate, or the way that the fundraising team might have internal speak or a culture versus maybe programs. And so I think the more tools that we give to our nonprofits that we support, like in the fundraising space or in the grant space, we talk about tools and templates and things, but other frameworks and other language choices, other ways to do teamwork, I think is another way for nonprofits to say, what am I doing now that I like? And what could I maybe change? Not about the mission that we deliver, but about how we as a team deliver.
Well, and I think, so you've just put a finger on something I feel is one of the biggest resistances I still think about actually implementing Scrum is I can't stand process. And so much of it is process, but it's communicating and being clear and knowing, what's the definition of done, and knowing all this stuff that is so important. So you actually have something valuable that Stephen Covey, I'm a Franklin Covey certified coach, and Stephen Covey used to say that there's an analogy he gave with green and clean, where once you know what the outcomes are that you're shooting for, how you get there is less important, as long as you have a defined outcome that you're both measuring yourself by. And he also used to say the fastest way to go with humans is to go slow in the beginning. Make sure and have everybody on board, and we're all going for the same thing. And then you can have high velocity because you're moving forward quickly. So what I think is challenging for nonprofits is very few nonprofits seem to be started by people that understand organizational development. Most of us that get into the nonprofit sector see a need and fix it. And then we bring other people along to fix it, and we have greater impact. And it takes forever for us to realize we're building an organization. We're just seeing a need and fixing a need. And it's urgent to us, whatever sector it's in, whether it's arts or historical preservation or feeding or pets or whatever. There's an urgency because it's a need that we're uniquely designed to see. And so the organization is sort of happenstance and happens around it. And the fundraising is part of it too. It's like Stephen Covey also used to say, when you pick up one end of a stick, you pick up the other end also. So when you pick up the end of fixing a problem, you also pick up the end of funding the fix. And it's so counterintuitive, because in for-profit things, the people that you serve are the people that generate the revenue so that you can serve them more. But in nonprofits, the people that you serve aren't generating the revenue for the most part. It's donors, and nobody that I know of grows up playing donor care specialist. When people are playing policemen and firemen and all these other things as kids, no one says, ooh, I want to be a donor care specialist. Donor care is not, it seems like an expendable extra, sort of like the red shirt ensign in Star Trek. You never, you don't want to deal with them because they're going to die by the end of the episode. And to know that they're central, it's because it's an organization. It's a totality. It's not just fixing the problem. So I think that our gift, or your gift with Agile and nonprofits, is being able to translate some of the stuff that really good, solid organizational development teaches and has learned about working with teams, and introducing it in different ways that can fit and help nonprofits without hindering them. It actually speeds up their work, even though it feels a little bit weird at first. Like putting on a suit can feel a little bit stiff at first, but then you can get really comfortable with wearing it.
Yeah. And so one of the things, as we think about the nonprofits, they're mission driven and they're doing great work, but they stop to think about how to improve that team process, right? Really introspect and reflect on the team behavior and the way they could improve. And so something that I love listening to you speak about in particular, there's a keynote that comes to mind from the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference a few years ago, one of the plenaries, where you talked about Enneagram and Parks and Rec. And then now we're in class, right? I'm just setting the stage for everyone so they understand. I mean, everyone was laughing, whether you knew the Parks and Rec series well or not, just an amazing way to connect the dots. And then we're in class just recently, and we're talking about the retrospective. So the Scrum event that's focused on teams saying what went well, what didn't go well, what could we improve? Seems easy, right? No, there's all that psychological safety stuff that comes up that Amy Edmondson talks about. And so I really want to see from that coaching perspective, the understanding of the Enneagram. I'm like, can we dig in on the retrospective a bit?
Absolutely. So even before we go, Enneagram. So if anybody doesn't know, Enneagram is a nine type personality typology that has roots into ancient wisdom tradition. We can see it in the Homer's Odyssey. We can see it in Dante's Inferno. There are different glimpses of it in different cultures and different spiritual traditions. It was codified pretty much last century by three figures, and you can research them and all. But it's not scientific. But like one of my colleagues said, she asked her therapist, "Are you familiar with the Enneagram?" Afraid that her therapist would have this negative reaction to it. And her psychotherapist said, "Yes, I am. And it's not scientific, but it totally gets me." I totally understand. So her therapist even loved the Enneagram. So for many of us, it's a helpful lens. But if 9 types is too much, there are 3 types within the Enneagram that would really help with any retrospective. There are some people have an advanced, they're called stances, and they're from Karen Horney's work in Germany. But some people are advanced. They're always future thinking and always action oriented. Some people are dependent. They're always kind of checking to see where the group's at and getting their information from the group. That's where they find their answers. And some people are withdrawing, where they kind of naturally just pull back. They can amass information more, but they can close doors, take a look at, just kind of, they get their energy from being alone and trying to work on a problem. Their tendency is to try to get the problem too perfect or the answer too perfect before they act on it. And then they often figure, well, what's the point? I can't get it that perfect anyway. So they never produce action. The dependent people can get stymied because they're always looking outside themselves for answers. And the aggressive people can get stymied because they run roughshod over everybody and start fixing things that aren't even necessarily problems because they haven't checked with the group or they haven't done any amassing. So we need all 3 types. And if we don't know that that's there in a retrospective, the aggressive people are already on to the next sprint. They're already probably doing the next thing. They're not even thinking about, let's look backward. The withdrawing people would probably be really helpful because they're past oriented. So they're able to process maybe more naturally. And the dependent people are great in that kind of retrospective because they're checking in with people to see where's the team at? How did we do? What's the communication that we needed? But, you and I both, my wife and I have been working with small groups since college. And part of it for us has been so important to have feedback sessions after an event, after an experience, just debrief, anchor the learning and also analyze it. Not everything that we experienced was actually what happened or was intended. So let's figure it out. So the Enneagram part of the advanced dependent withdrawn layers very well on the Enneagram. Which is very helpful.
And so when we think about retrospectives and some of the common questions that come up, I mean, it also is one of the Scrum events that is, I'd say, a low barrier to entry in some nonprofits' minds. They tend to start either with sprints or with retrospectives. Those are the 2 places that feel, okay, I'll worry about backlog later. And these are the 2 where people often start. And what's interesting to me, we've already talked about sprints and how it's kind of a cadence that might work in a lot of settings. But when we think about retrospectives, to me, I'm like, okay, yes, maybe it feels like a nice, easy conversation to have, but it's deceivingly so, because it could turn into a blame game if you're not really careful.
Yeah.
Or it could just be really quiet without prompts. And so I'd love your perspective on what you can do, especially if you acknowledge that there's these maybe the 3 larger types or the 9 different Enneagram types, what are some ways that you would suggest a team could create that psychologically safe space, or that the leader, maybe the product owner, or they don't call themselves a product owner, CEO, ED, whatever, right? But the leader in that situation, how could they help create a safe space for a retrospective? What's your perspective?
Well, one thing I've noticed with the Scrum Master class teaching courses, the retrospectives we do are supposed to be nonverbal. Is that intended? Is that a Scrum thing, or is that just you got your brilliance?
uh, Thanks, Mark. That was great. It's really because it's a virtual class. If it's auditory, then it becomes a lot harder to get a lot of feedback quickly. I've found that I've participated in both styles, verbal and nonverbal. And so, but if it's nonverbal for at least a few minutes, even if you're in person, it gives the chance for a lot of people, regardless of maybe their personality type or their Enneagram type, to share quickly and to generate a lot of thoughts without having someone come over the top. So, but in the virtual setting, you're right. It is meant to be a quiet piece so that everyone can quickly think and no one's speaking over the other.
So I think for retrospectives, what I've learned a lot in the last couple of years with race equity conversations by facilitators of race equity conversations, things like we will criticize ideas and be critical of opinions, but not dismissive of people. That kind of setting from the person who's leading the retrospective can be really helpful, because it really, all of us are motivated by how we see the world. And we want to accomplish tasks by the way it makes sense to us, whether it's the 3 stances. It makes sense for aggressive people when the pandemic happened to, all right, how are we going to fix this? What's the projects we're going to do? What's the motion we're going to take? Whereas everybody else is saying, hey, wait, we got to pull back. We don't even know what's happening. How can you take action? Or for a 1 on the Enneagram, where 1s are seeing very much black and white. There is a right or wrong, I guess is what it is. There's an external right or wrong, and they're driven, wonderfully driven for excellence, but they don't understand that the other 8 of the other 9 types don't define excellence the same way they do. For the rest of us, good enough is good enough. We don't have to be excellent at what we do. And one of the problems with the challenges that 1s have personally is that they're always falling short, because they can always see what's lacking in their response. And so they have this chorus of inner critics that are just hounding them about how much they're falling short. So their way of showing love for everybody else is to also point out, it's kind of like to preempt the critic, like, hey, you missed that there. And that's really, they think that's really loving. The rest of us think it's micromanaging and annoying. So knowing, and that's just one of the 9 types. So for a 1 in a retrospective, if you know you're a 1, it could be taking a step back and not leading with well, this is exactly, I've Googled this and this is the answer. I know this is the right thing. But just holding back and giving some space for some other, just to see where things are going. And I think that's what the Enneagram helps us all do, is to step back. This is the way I tend to react. Defense, and most of personality in the Enneagram theory, the personalities are just a defense mechanism to survive in the world. And part of real growth with the Enneagram isn't to be the best 1 or the best 7 or the best 9. It's to transcend that, to recognize those patterns. Oh, there's that knee-jerk reaction again. And how do I transcend that? So for me as a 7, I'm always skipping on to the next thing. So part of what I don't like about process is that I want the next thing. I want the next shiny object. Suzanne Stabile, one of my favorite Enneagram teachers, says that the 7s are never there when the confetti drops and the celebratory party is being had, because they're always on to the next project. They're always in the future, thinking that there's even greater things to come, which is a huge strength and that brings a lot of energy to the table. But part of the deficiency is they don't get to celebrate and enjoy that. They're always enjoying the anticipation. An example for me is restaurants. I'll enjoy the anticipation of the restaurant and looking at the menu, but when I get my food, it's not what I expected. And I had to pull back from criticizing the food at restaurants or the service at hotels, because my kids started physically reacting to the fact that Dad's going to complain about this. And then I realized, oh, maybe this is just a habit I'm in, not necessarily a thing that I need to take issue with. And I think as we get better in tune with ourselves, retrospectives are going to be easier too, because you can start seeing this consistently happens. And is it because of me, or just the way I see things, or is this because it's something that needs to be addressed by the team?
Such a good point. So
There's
one of the
so
things,
much that we could go into,
I
isn't
know,
there?
and so I test as an Enneagram 3 with a strong,
I would have done that for any of them, but threes
but,
and sevens are aggressive. I'm a 7, you're a 3. We're both like,
and knowing that is really important, but I also have strong tendencies towards a 1, which is funny that that's the one you've just articulated. And so what I also have learned, because we actually, our entire team at DH100 Consulting, everyone that comes in takes the Enneagram, not because we're typing someone, but because it helps us think about how to interact. And whether we're thinking about like love, we talk about love languages for grant makers. I love the love language books. Different conversation, different.
yeah, one of my favorite consultants, Kashana Palmer, just put it, love languages for clients too, which I've taught love languages for donors for years. Because the 5 love languages, just for those of you who aren't aware of it, the premise is there are 5 different ways of communicating love. There could be more, but Gary Smalley put together 5. And if you communicate love with gifts of time, somebody who wants gifts or acts of service isn't going to hear you're giving love. So it's just as much as somebody saying I love you in Chinese. If you're not a Chinese speaker, you're not getting it. So it's learning to be, again, that self-awareness of, oh, I tend to give a lot of gifts, and that may be because that's my natural dialect for love. But my daughter just plops herself in my seat at random times. Maybe time is her thing. And I am not, and rather than being annoyed, maybe I need to adjust myself or move my monitor so that I can see her when she sits there.
Yeah. And to me, it all like, it's another way, going back to the nonprofit toolbox idea, thinking about love languages in then a business setting and your team setting. When you're talking about what went well, some people love hearing what went well. But for me, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, we actually have a happiness budget for D.H. Leonard Consulting.
Super smart.
And so it could be National Coffee Day, it could be National Writers Day, it could be for no reason. We sent s'mores kits after a very hard application this year. So they could, thanks s'more much. We also like a lot of puns. But, my perspective as chief product owner, 3 with a 1. I've got a Scrum Master that's a different type. Our marketing and training team, Scrum Master has a different type. She's a helper, no surprise. But everyone's got these different things. And so part of, too, thinking about the retrospective, like we love to give different prompts, but which ones might help someone speak more or less or feel recognized in a different way, to me has been, I think it's an interesting challenge, but one that takes a lot of time and like thoughtful engagement. And so let's close on this if we could. So I know you've got the bow tie on, so it makes me think fundraising coach. I can't help it, but we're thinking
my business cards are bow ties too. So
but I want to talk big picture leadership coach.
Sure.
So if you were to have a client that said, I'm really interested in this retrospective idea, what would you recommend as a way that a leader approach it in a way that, and there's a lot of factors, right? We just discussed people's types or their love language, but a few general tips. How could an organization, what do you think they could consider for a retrospective that would create a safe environment for them? Do you have any thoughts?
I think, well, first of all, I think it's the 3 questions that I normally use. And as I'm thinking them in my head, I'm already thinking, I think they're very aligned with Scrum. But what went well? I think it's always good to start on what went well. Instead of what failed is really, so many of us, if our culture has an Enneagram type, it's a 3. So 3's failure is a moral failing. Like that's a moral issue. You never fail. You always want to look successful. And life is a series of failures, which is just the way life is. So, but if we know that failures are often seen as really bad and moral issues, don't introduce that language, but maybe what didn't go well or what didn't go as expected is what I like. So what went really well? What didn't happen that we expected or didn't go as we expected? That has the ambiguity. Sometimes it's really good. Something really went much better than we planned. Sometimes it didn't. And then what can we improve on the next time? I think those 3 questions tend to take personalities out of it. It's about experiences and systems. And that could be a really great place to start. And I think anybody could benefit from that. And then you start knowing your team. If you know that there's that one guy, like that Marc Pitman guy, just automatically talks, you might sit beside that person. So one of the things I learned in small group dynamics, if you're co-located, is if you sit beside a talker, they won't talk as much, because what they're looking for is your eye contact. And when you look them in the eye, they think it's permission to speak, because like me, I think everybody's just waiting to verbally express. Why wouldn't we? But they could be just breathing. So sitting next to the talker can be a great way in a team of they feel honored and special, and they're right next to you, and you're also giving space for others to go. Another thing that can make it safer, I've seen as a coach, and I don't know how this fits in the Scrum framework, is whenever I do a board training, I try to interview every board member beforehand. Just a 10 or 15 minute interview. It's on a SurveyMonkey form. They don't know, it's just I tell them, but it's not like a quiz that they have to take. It's just a conversation, a structured conversation. But it allows the introverts to talk just as much as the extroverts. And it allows the naysayers to get just as much as the people that may try to drown them out when they're co-located. So maybe if you know that you have a lot of people that are more withdrawn and just take time to process, they don't think that quickly, they think about what they should have said after the meeting, give them space in advance. Hey, here are the 3 questions. If you want to jot down some thoughts, we're going to be discussing them on Thursday. Really love your input on that.
Those are such great tips. I can't wait to think about some of them during future retrospectives. Just saying.
Okay. And I can't wait to now go to the Scrum guidebook to see, wait, is that the 3 that we talked about last week in class?
What didn't go as expected actually would be a replacement for the language, kind of in that middle, if we think about the 3 charts. But I love the framing on it. And it's right to the intent of what it is, because it's about how do you look at the team and inspect and adapt yourselves, not what you deliver, not your services, not your fundraising materials or your grant applications, but we as people, how are we improving? And I think, honestly, that's why if the nonprofit teams can focus on how they improve their work together, that's what makes it faster for them to deliver their mission, because they're improving. I know you might not want to talk about process a lot as our Enneagram 7, but that's what I see delivering that twice the impact in half the time. It's because they're taking the time for themselves, for their teams, thinking about the sustainable pace and how they can support each other. And so, Marc, you've given some amazing tips to us today. And if people want to ask you anything more about your leadership, because you've got all these different things, Stephen Covey and the love languages and Enneagram, right? Your toolbox is very full, and we're honored that you're adding Scrum to it. If people want to learn more about your work, where should they head? Is there maybe I'm guessing a website?
In imminent to this conversation, they could Google The Surprising Gift of Doubt. Is my upcoming leadership book that is in its final edits right now. So at the time of this recording, Concord Leadership Group is a great place, fundraisingcoach.com, concordleadershipgroup.com, and the nonprofitacademy.com or the .coms. But anybody that felt like, yeah, something that was said in this conversation makes a ton of sense, and I just don't know, I want the research behind it. I don't want just my boss or my board will never go for just opinion. If you go to concordleadershipgroup.com/report, you can see what we called the wake-up call. We hired Adrian Sargent to do research on what creates a culture of philanthropy. And one of the most amazing things that came out of that report was clear succession planning, clear strategic planning, and high degree of, my professional development needs are being taken care of. 3 non-fundraising issues, but all organizational issues, were directly correlated with the high-performing culture of philanthropy, where everybody was raising money, or everybody saw that they had a part in raising money, not just one person or one department. So all of what we're doing here, even the research, the academic university level research shows will impact your fundraising, as well as make all of your other work much more enjoyable, and your interpersonal relationships too will be richer for it. The best part, I think, of all of this, Diane, is that it impacts all of your relationships, because you start going to your faith community or your hobbies or your other things or your family, and you start realizing, oh wait, I just learned this at work, but we're all humans and this stuff applies in different places. So I think the impact from this is going to be great. And I really am glad that you and your team are spreading the love and spreading the knowledge. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Marc. And thanks again for being with us today. It was a lot of fun conversation. I'm like, oh, okay, we'll talk more another time because now I want to talk about the book. We'll have to talk more later, but thank you for being with us.